I never fucked anybody over in my life. Didn't have it coming to me. You got that? All I have in this world is my balls and my word. And I don't break them for no one. You understand?
This guy here is Cami Barzini, and at the time of this recording he was head wrestling coach at American Top Team, the team where Jorge Gamebred Masvidal hones his craft. And he's telling Masvidal the game plan after years of paying his dues to the fight game.
Time to wrap shit up, put some people away, get those bonuses, make yourself a little bit more comfortable life and go win the whole thing, get that pay-per-view money. $3 million fight.
That was 6 years ago, and now 16 fights later, Masvidal has paid those dues twice over, and at UFC 244 he will wrap up Barzini's game plan. He's claimed the knockouts and the bonus checks, so next up is the biggest fight of his career against Nate Diaz, and yeah, that pay-per-view money too. In mid-September, Masvidal faced off with Diaz for the first time to promote their fight, and to the promotion's credit when it comes to presentation, they did their part. The location, the rooftop of Pier 17 in New York City, put a unique spin on the UFC's usual fare, and that helped separate this press conference from the rest of the pack. But in its structure, it was unremarkable. We know the UFC's formula by now, and at its core, the event was a typical UFC produced presser, right down to the faulty microphones.
What's up, New York? My mic not working?
Yeah, is this working now?
And as the night set in, the once striking backdrop of the Brooklyn Bridge transformed into an indistinct silhouette, removing much of the event's character, and it left us with a largely uneventful affair. And that applies to its climax too, the stare down. Even that wasn't anything to write home about. It didn't have the intensity of, say, Crow Cop Vanderlei, nor was it a big drama show like Cormier Jones, but none of that mattered, at least not for me. It didn't need any of that because the concept which inspired the bout, the BMF title, inherently discourages it. It's a belt Diaz will into existence, and his beliefs dictate that a fighter should be judged primarily on their pugilistic acumen. Theatrics are superfluous. The belt also serves as a protest symbol against today's MMA climate, which is ripe for someone of Diaz or Masvidal's ilk to emerge as superstars, but more on that later. The sense of improbability captivated me because it still feels like a fantasy come true. This time last year, Diaz was 2 years without a fight, and Masvidal was a year away from the sport, participating in a reality show on a 2-fight losing streak and with little to no momentum. So as I watched them on Pier 17 in New York City as the products of the biggest fight of the year to date, competing for a tailor-made belt branded on their shared philosophy, the same question kept creeping its way back into my mind. How the hell did they get here? It's impossible to ignore the clear parallels between the UFC 244 headliners. They're MMA originals with old school mentalities who have been competing since before it was cool, before The Ultimate Fighter. And their career trajectories also mirror one another, but not entirely. Diaz's surge in popularity seemed probable under the right conditions, whereas Masvidal's didn't. For him, it happened overnight relative to how long he's been in the game, and this was largely due to their starting positions. Diaz's road to success wasn't easy by any means, but compared to Masvidal's, it was certainly clearer. He had a successful brother in the game, he signed with the UFC early in his career, and he went through The Ultimate Fighter, which, despite its irrelevance now, was a real star-making platform back in the day. And you only need to look at the previous season's winners to verify that. From the 8 winners in the 4 seasons which preceded Nate's, 4 of them became UFC champions: Forrest Griffin, Rashad Evans, Michael Bisping and Matt Serra. 2 competed for a UFC title, Diego Sanchez and Joe Stevenson, leaving 2 who never fought for UFC gold, Kendall Grove and Travis Lutter. And for completion's sake, Lutter was actually scheduled to fight Anderson Silva for the middleweight title, but he missed weight, so they fought in a non-title bout instead. So despite Diaz being an outsider and an unconventional star, his path to the UFC was as conventional as you could get. Masvidal's wasn't. His wasn't so clear. He didn't have a famous fighting relative, he was 31 fights deep into his MMA career before he signed with the UFC, and he didn't go through the Ultimate Fighter system. But to analyse how he got to UFC 244 and to outline how murky that road was, we should go back to where his story begins. his underground street fighting days in Miami, because that's still a big part of his identity all these years later. And it's funny how life repeats itself sometimes. Two key moments from his fighting career, one from his street fighting days and one from his time in the UFC, mirror each other in an interesting way. Hear me out. When Masvidal flew across the pond to fight Darren Till in his home country of England, you couldn't help but feel it was an attempt by the UFC matchmakers to get the Liverpoolian back on track. And I'm not calling shenanigans on the part of the company here, so take off your tinfoil hat. All I'm saying is Till was coming off an unsuccessful title challenge to Tyron Woodley, and the company had put a lot of time, money and effort into his brand, so it's only natural that they'd be shrewd in their matchmaking. And I'm not suggesting that the UFC thought that Masvidal was an easy fight, but the odds clearly weren't in his favour. He hadn't fought in 2 years, with his losing streak matching that number too. He'd be fighting a guy with a significant size advantage in Till, and it'd be hosted in enemy territory in Till's backyard, so to speak. In short, if you're going to fight Masvidal, this was the time to do it. So now if we rewind time back to his street fighting days, you'd see him in a similar scenario, albeit on a much smaller scale. He was training in the same gym as Kimbo Slice, who, before turning to MMA himself, was famous for his career as an underground fighter. So famous that he'd be later baptised the King of the Web Brawlers by Rolling Stone, to which Peter Parker says it's the biggest miscarriage of justice since Machida Shogun 1. Anyway, as Masvidal tells the story, he was in a McDonald's drive-thru when Kimbo called him with an offer he couldn't refuse, an unpaid street fight on 1 hour's notice. So I guess fighter pay is a problem on the streets too. But despite all that, Masvidal, potentially fueled by a Big Mac, accepted the opportunity, if you could call it that. And in case you were wondering, his opponent wasn't Kimbo, but close. It was Kimbo's protege, a guy called Ray, and he was allegedly a big deal on the scene. Not only was he Kimbo's boy and was cool enough to go by just a single name, but that same day he fought and knocked out a correctional officer in another organised street fight. So when it comes to street fighting, his credibility was at Bison or Ryu levels.
Hadouken.
Not only that, he was a big dude, considerably bigger than Ponytail. Oh, by the way, Ponytail is what they called Jorge back then for obvious reasons. But like in Liverpool, despite the odds being firmly stacked against him, fighting a big opponent essentially in their backyard, Masvidal won in a big bad way. They rematched about a week later, and to Ray's credit, it was certainly more competitive, but the end result was the same. And even though Jorge won the first one, this was unexpected. I mean, even Kimbo was speechless.
You got that. What do you think, champ? Tell me what you think.
Dog, look here.
No, those are the only fights I've found from his underground fighting days, and that's because, by all accounts, they're the only ones that have ever surfaced online, but they weren't the only ones that he's ever had. He said he started street fighting at the age of 14 and said he was about 18 at the time of the fights with Ray, which means they took place about a year before he made his pro MMA debut. But you can certainly see how these fighting roots influenced how he approached MMA later on. And by that I mean how he handles himself outside the cage. His modus operandi is essentially run your mouth and you better back it up with your fists, which is, I'm sure, an approach inherited from the underground fighting scene. Inside the cage, however, he subverts the trope of the street fighter. They aren't usually known for their technical prowess. I mean, I don't know about you, but when I reflect on street fighters who made the jump to MMA, the likes of Kimbo Slice, Dada 5000 and Tank Abbott come to mind. And even if you love those guys, it's by no means because of their complex MMA skill sets. But in Masvidal's case, this could be the reason that you're a fan. He's an exceptional case of a street fighter who became a truly skilled mixed martial artist, yet he's still a fighter at heart, and he holds that primal, even violent side of the sport in high regard. But it's not surprising that he got so good at MMA, especially when you hear him talk. It's clear he has a genuine love for the art, not just the brawl, which certainly separates him from many of his underground contemporaries. And his primary reason for turning to MMA over the likes of boxing or kickboxing, despite his game revolving around striking, also differentiates him.
So why MMA? Why didn't you go down the boxing route? I know you dabbled a little bit, but why did you decide full-fledged MMA is my best shot?
I love wrestling. It's like, I love the wrestling.
That's a surprising admission for a guy who's known for his proclivity to strike, but he's never shied away from that fact. However, he has a particular style of wrestling that he likes to see applied to MMA.
People think it the wrong way when I say like crotch sniffers and things like that. They think I'm going against grapplers. No, I love grappling. I love wrestling. The reason I do MMA is because I love wrestling. But I like guys like Matt Hughes. You know, he should take you down and beat the piss out of you. That's what I love to see.
But he's also conscious of that Street Fighter label and recognizes the stigma that follows it.
Does it bother you when people still relate you to the street fighting stuff?
It doesn't bother me when they're like, oh man, your street fights. I love them because people, you know, you see that it's a street fight. Two dudes with bare knuckles just going at it. That's cool. But when they say like he's a street fighter, that I don't like, because there's nobody in the gym in my weight class or in the world that you're gonna put in front of me is gonna outclass me, is gonna like, hey, if Masvidal gets taken down, it's over. No, you know, you saw Ben take me down and me get right back up. You saw me take Ben down. You see me to anybody that if I could take them down, or I could stop a submission, or I could hang on my feet. So when they just say he's a street fighter, no, I'm not some dude at the bar getting drunk doing fights. I did that at one point in my life to get money, but that's not who I am, you know?
So I get the sense that at least early in his career, he worked harder than most because he recognized that stigma. But it's also clear that he's inherited his drive and work ethic from his parents, and their story is best told by Masvidal himself.
But his life, my life is like a walk in the park compared to his. This gentleman really had a for real hard life. He came from Cuba at the age of 14. He stole a tire from a tractor, turned it into a raft. Him, his best friend at the time, and his uncle's best friend, none of them were sea merchants or none of that. They just said, we don't want to be told what our favorite color is going to be or what to watch on TV, so they left Cuba.
They defected.
They defected, and they ended up somewhere either in the Bahamas or the Virgin Islands, I forget. And from there, they got extracted to the USA. So my dad was 14 at the time, and all he knows is just street life from that time on, because he was in Section 8 housing, project housing. He was in the worst neighborhoods possible with no guidance whatsoever. So his life is something that was so impactful to me just to hear it. Like, man, good thing I don't got to go through all that, and you're here to guide me, you know. That's the reason why I'm here a lot of the times, you know. I got a lot of love and admiration for my mom. She busted her butt to get me where I'm at numerous times. She was working, she had a full-time job at this dollar rent-a-car place, and she had a part-time job. Then at night, I remember she used to pack up like necklaces.
Okay.
Like she'd make necklaces all night long. And I would wake up like at 2 in the morning as a kid and see her working. And I'd be like, man, she just left to work, came back from work, and is still working right now to make ends meet. And those type of visuals installed a work ethic that you could go to the greatest gym in the world, American Top Team, and ask any of the coaches there who's got the best work ethic or one of the best work ethics, and they'll tell you that's me, man. I don't pull that knee off because I'm just so talented. No, I rep that knee more than any human being walking this earth. I'm in there every day, getting after my repetitions, my running, my sprints, my swimming, whatever it is that I gotta do, I'm out working everybody in that room. And a big part of that is because of my mother. The work ethic that I saw that she had, it was insane to me, you know, and I was at a young age and this impacted me, you know, so that's how strong of a work ethic, that immigrant mentality, they say now, it's like trendy to say, but it's true, you know. She came over with a work drive, and then when my dad went away, she had to turn it up even more, you know.
And he needed that work ethic. As a quote-unquote independent contractor, you're only as good as your recent work, and outside the UFC, organizations often disappeared and fights weren't guaranteed. This meant that many fighters like Masvidal bounced between promotions to gain experience. Before MMA, he fought behind laundromats, and then in MMA, he fought in the AFC, Bodog Fights, a promotion called Crazy Horse Fights, which was apparently not affiliated with Charles Bennett, St. Goku, Bellator 1 for that matter, G-Force Fights, Astra, Shark Fights, and then finally Strikeforce. And in that run, he fought familiar names like Rafael Assunção, Joe Lozon, Eve Edwards, Paul Daly, KJ Nunes, and Gilbert Melendez, just to name a few. And these names also highlight how improbable Masvidal's late career bloom is. Take Joe Lozon for example. When they fought in 2005, Masvidal was 2 years deep into his MMA career with a 5-1 record, and Lozon was 8-0 and a year and a half into his MMA career. Lozon peaked around 2012 to 2013, yet Masvidal has hit his in 2019. That's insane. But despite all he achieved by the time he got to Strikeforce and competed for a title, he was still primarily known for being an ex-street fighter and for being on the receiving end of Toby Amada's unique inverted triangle submission. And I'd even argue that up to recently that was still the case, even well into his UFC career, which kicked off in 2013. You see, he was admired by many of those who took notice, but the problem was that those who took notice were not many. They were predominantly hardcore MMA fans, not the wider fan base, and especially not those damn filthy casuals. But like Diaz, he's never loved the media, and that lack of exposure likely hurt him. But he was also inconsistent too, or at least his results were. Before the Till fight, he was 8-6 in the UFC, with all of his losses coming by way of decision, 4 of which being split. And it's true that he was unlucky not to win some of those decisions, especially the Aloy Quinta one, but as Max Holloway would say, it is what it is. They happened, and that's what the records will always show. But after the last one, a unanimous decision loss to Stephen Thompson, he took an extended break from competition. And by all accounts, it was always his plan to take some time off to heal some injuries and reevaluate his career, which was clearly at a crossroads. But it was never supposed to last as long as it did. It ended up being 16 months, the longest break he's ever had between fights, which is crazy for a prolific 16-year veteran. In that time, he found himself on a reality show of all things, so in a way, he got his Ultimate Fighter. And it could have just been a nice paycheck in the absence of a fight purse, but the show was uniquely beneficial to him, outside of monetary gain. He said that something changed during the 13 weeks in the show, and it wasn't just his hair. It was a psychological shift of sorts. But he said that it wasn't the show itself that forced the change, but rather it was the environment that it placed him in. It forced isolation from the rest of the world, and it put him alone with his thoughts, allowing him to reject his demons and realign his goals. And the time off itself was likely crucial too, because he's never had a break. Before this instance, his longest break between fights was 11 months, but that was when he was just 5-0 in 2004. Since then, it's been training camp after training camp and fight after fight, and that's got to be tough on both your mental well-being and your physical well-being. But whatever it was, when the Till fight came around, he claimed he was a changed man, and whether he was or not, for him, that night in London was monumental. Not only did he knock out Till, but he also had his now famous run-in with Leon Edwards after the fight. And while that moment, compounded with the interview where he dropped the famous 3-piece in a soda line, gave him more exposure than the knockout itself, it couldn't have happened without what preceded it. If he had lost to Till and everything happened as it did, ending with him punching Edwards, I'm not so sure the narrative would have read like it did in reality. Remember when I said that the current MMA climate is ripe for somebody like Masvidal or Diaz to emerge as superstars? Well, that's kind of where this comes into play. What was the inciting action here? Masvidal was in the middle of an ESPN interview and Edwards was trash talking him, interrupting the interview as he walked by. This is why Masvidal bailed to confront Edwards and then ultimately delivered the 3-piece combo. So the narrative was, whether it's right or wrong, disrespectful loudmouth Leon Edwards, who was ironically usually a quiet guy by the way, gets what he deserves. And crucially, this happened in a post-McGregor-Habib world where fans saw trash talk go too far. And with the likes of Colby Covington running rampant, there was a sense that many fans were itching to see fighters who led with trash talk get their comeuppance. And Masvidal was the perfect avatar for those fans. That's not to say that fans don't like trash talk, nor is it a dying art. It'll always be a feature of the sport, all combat sports for that matter. But the market has been oversaturated with it. And like anything that becomes stale and its conventions become second nature, viewers demand something different, counter-programming. Masvidal offers that. He effectively rejects trash talk, or more accurately, he rejects inauthentic trash talk. And that's an important distinction. When he says that he hates trash talk, what I hear is he dislikes the manufactured version. But this is precisely why some people call him a hypocrite. It'd be foolish to say he doesn't engage in trash talk because the internet is an archive of evidence against that claim. But I think the focus on authenticity is important here. But even disregarding that, let's remember that we're dealing with human beings. We're not perfect. His actions aren't always consistent with his principles, but if you dig deep enough into anyone, you'll find contradictions. It's a deeply human flaw. These contradictions were certainly evident in his friendship with Colby Covington. And remember, the character that Colby now portrays is a relatively new development. He wasn't always this way. He wasn't much of a talker at all. So when Colby decided that a gimmick change would be best for his career, Masvidal had to reconcile the fact that his friend's actions were now incompatible with his worldview, and this saw him dismiss behaviour he'd normally condemn. But he didn't let everything slide.
Colby making fun of Matt Humes, did you see that?
No.
He said, yeah, Colby made fun of Matt Humes getting hit by a train. Not cool.
Matt Hughes.
Matt Hughes, yeah. Matt Hume, yeah.
I didn't see that. That's not even remotely funny. That's the stupidest shit I've ever heard.
So you could clearly see the internal conflict that was going on. Anyways, they're now rivals and their friendship is in the past, but that's a long story and one for another video. So let's get back to the authenticity dichotomy. He hasn't always effectively articulated his point of view on this, but he probably explained it best when he was on the Joe Rogan Experience.
Get it, me and you don't like each other. John Jones and DC, I love it because you can feel these guys don't like each other.
Yeah, you feel it. Yeah,
kill each other, you know.
But to me, it's okay.
Everybody's doing it.
You see, if he feels like there's genuine dislike, then he's along for the ride. If he feels that one's verbal attacks are nothing more than a manufactured way to create buzz, then he's not. And this is where Ben Askren comes into the picture. Look at it like this. Did Askren sincerely hate Masvidal before targeting him as a future opponent? I doubt it. I mean, he said he did, but there's very little evidence to suggest that it was anything but Askren being Askren, the ultimate instigator. He inserted himself into the middle of the build-up for Masvidal's fight with Till because he wanted to fight the winner, and it was evident that he expected Till to win because most of his focus was on him. But to keep his options open, he threw a few digs at Masvidal, and I bet that this is what annoyed Masvidal most. He saw Askren manufacturing a rivalry that wasn't there. But in the end, Askren's efforts worked because they created one. And not only that, they created a rivalry that fans were extremely interested in. So much so that their fight at UFC 239 was the card's main attraction, despite its 2 championship fights. And we all know what happened when they finally met. In a matter of seconds, Masvidal was taunting an incapacitated Askren after claiming the record for fastest knockout in UFC history with a 5-second flying knee. And this was unquestionably his star-making moment. It was a perfect storm, and it condensed the essence of everything that drew fans to him into a digestible highlight that will be shared in perpetuity. And virtually every condition that his breakthrough needed was in place. His popularity was at an all-time high after his triumph in London. His opponent was perfect, a provocateur who was his absolute antithesis, but also an opponent who, like him or not, promoted the fight in such a way that a compelling narrative naturally revealed itself. A narrative with a resolution analogous to a troll finally getting his comeuppance. And in the social media age in which we live in today, that's a narrative that everyone could understand and get behind. And now at UFC 244, Masvidal will fight Diaz, and the narrative couldn't be any more different, yet it's just as easy to grasp. It's 2 BMFs who don't need to talk and don't really need a press conference because we know they're gonna fight. And that's all we really need to know. Thanks for watching this video. If you liked it, hit that like button. I do hate asking for that, but honestly it's actually very important because YouTube will then possibly recommend this to other people, so it really does help us out. Also, if you want to see more videos like this, you can subscribe to the channel, and I'm going to leave some videos on the screen there. It was one on Nate Diaz, so you can watch that before UFC 244, and there's one also on Conor McGregor. And as you probably noticed, I am Irish, so I do have an opinion on a lot of stuff that he has been getting up to, so you can check that one out too.